Hi everyone, welcome back to another video in the SAGIS Training series. In this video, we will provide an overview of several tools that can be used alongside SAGIS and explain how they can improve your use of SAGIS-SIMCAT. Full details about these tools are available in their respective user manuals. Now, let's get started.
We are now going to look at the climate change or sensitivity analysis tool. This tool was developed for Upware to carry out sensitivity analysis on a pre-existing SIMCAT model and SIMCAT DAT file. The SIMCAT DAT file and the associated MPD files are modified by this tool without needing to go back to SAGIS to make changes. A README sheet is included in the tool. This gives detailed instructions on how to carry out the sensitivity analysis, which I will not go into in this video. The tool is driven from the controls sheet that you can see now. The name of the SIMCAT DAT file that we want to use to carry out the sensitivity analysis is entered in cell C2, and the location of the SIMCAT exe file is entered in cell C3. We enter the number of sensitivity runs that we wish to carry out in cell C6 and the chemical determinant number in cell C9. This is based on the order in the SIMCAT DAT file. In this example, phosphate is number 4. We will now turn to the global controls sheet. Again, here we have to add the number of adjustments. For example, it might be 4. Clear, and then click on this black arrow. Each column to the right of start number represents one of the sensitivity analysis runs, and the number in the column represents the change to a value in SIMCAT. For example, to the travel time parameters, to the flow inputs, diffuse inputs, and the effluent quality and flow inputs. Initially, these are set to 1, but other adjustments can be applied as a ratio. So, for example, if we wish to change travel time alpha to be double, we'd put 2 in this scenario run. If we wanted it to be half, we might put 0.5 in this scenario run. And we can do this to all the parameters. There are other ways to do this automatically that I won't go into now, but are described on the README sheet. We will now go back to the controls sheet. The tool is run by clicking on these buttons, starting at the top and working down. When we click on Click to read in DAT file, it reads in the information in the SIMCAT DAT file and puts it into this spreadsheet on various tabs. For example, feature data is in this tab, flow data in this tab. When we click on the second button, click to set up sensitivity run, this transfers the data that the tool has already read from the SIMCAT DAT file into various other tabs, each related to one particular aspect of the DAT file. If, for example, we look at the effluent tab, we can see, going down the page, in each row is one of the effluent features. For each of the runs, there are the original values in columns M to R and adjusted values in columns F to K. In the first instance, the adjustments specified on the Global Controls tab are applied to each of these sensitivity runs. So number 1 here will correspond to number 1 on the Global Controls tab. However, if we want to make adjustments to the individual features, these can be specified in columns T to Y, again, for flow and water quality. If we now go back to the Controls tab, we can click the third button, which is optional, called Apply Manual Changes to Adjustments, to apply the individual adjustments, in this case to each of the features. And this overrides the global adjustments. The third option is to edit columns F to K, the adjusted values, directly. The approach is the same for the other elements of the SIMCAT DAT file, for example, diffuse inputs and the travel time parameters. Once the adjustments have been defined for each of the sensitivity runs, we click on the fourth button, Sensitivity Testing Runs. This creates the new SIMCAT DAT files in which the adjustments have been applied within new folders, one for each of the scenario runs. Once the runs are completed, we define in these boxes which statistics we want to look at. For example, there are different statistics on flow and water quality, whether we want it for all locations or some of them, whether it's annual statistics or monthly, whether it's face value or confidence limits. We now click on this button to the right of these boxes called Read in Outputs. This reads in the outputs from SIMCAT for each of the sensitivity runs. The colored buttons below allow the user to look at different statistics from these runs. These are described in detail on the README sheet, but I'll quickly click on the buttons now so that you can see the kind of outputs that can be viewed. The first one, View Comparison Plots, shows a comparison between the sensitivity runs and the original DAT file as a ratio. The second, Statistical Outputs, shows the overall statistics for each of the runs. Change plots show how each scenario changes as you go down a specified chain of the river. Monthly outputs compare the outputs for each month if this has been selected on the control sheet. This concludes this section of the video on the climate change / sensitivity analysis tool. Remember, there's a lot more information on the README sheet. We are now going to look at the catchment statistics and fair share calculation tool. This tool allows the user to interrogate the outputs from a SAGIS-SIMCAT model run focused on particular catchments in the model area by providing a range of visualization tools for the output data. In a similar way to some of the other tools that we have looked at, we first need to enter the name of the DAT file that has provided the model outputs that we wish to see. We then have to specify the information that we wish to extract from the SIMCAT outputs in these highlighted cells. This includes the model number. This is referenced in the SAGIS-SIMCAT model that generated the outputs. It is important to enter this because otherwise the tool will not be able to reference some of the information it needs. We also need to specify which chemical determinant we are interested in and whether we want to look at all model output points or selected points. We also need to specify where the target that the tool uses in comparison with the model output can come from SIMCAT, from the box below in this box, or from a table in another tab that we will look at now, the P Targets tab. Information on all these settings is provided in the box in column P. After this, we click on the Initiate Data button. This reads information from the DAT file and then read in SAGIS. This reads in the outputs from the SIMCAT model run. We now select the areas or catchments in the model for which we wish to extract data from the SIMCAT outputs. These are specified in the area selection box. We can select up to 4 areas, and within each of these areas there are a number of ways to select the outputs. If we zoom in, the first drop-down box in an area specifies a water body, and the reaches within this water body and upstream of this water body are selected. The second drop-down box specifies a reach, and again, this reach and those upstream of the reach will be selected. The next drop-down box allows you to select an operational catchment, and the next is a particular water body. So in this case, it's just the reaches within the water body. The next option is to apply selected reaches, yes or no. If we select yes, the tool references the list in columns AD to AH, and for each area, a 1 specifies that that reach will be included in the output statistics. Finally, we can select a habitat site from a drop-down list. An important point to note is that only one of these options should be selected at any time. Once this has been completed for the 4 areas, we then click on the Select Area button. This will provide details of each area in this box. It shows the number of operational catchments included, number of water bodies, reaches, etc. We then click on the Generate Catchment Statistics button, and this transfers the data that has already been read in from the SIMCAT outputs to the spreadsheet for the 4 areas selected. We can now look at the output statistics and visualizations by clicking on the colored buttons at the bottom of the controls sheet. I will now quickly go through these. So if we start with the View Output button, we can see sector apportionment for the entire model and 4 model areas for concentration and load. Below, we see some other statistics, the number of locations within each area, the mean concentration and confidence limits, the mean load and confidence limits, the probability of compliance, and probability of WFD class. If we click on View Distribution, we see a histogram for the mean concentration at all the output locations for the entire model area and the 4 model areas, a histogram of the percentile concentrations and the probability of compliance. When we click on View River Length, we see various statistics of the length of river passing the target, in this case the face value, the upper confidence limit and lower confidence limit. It shows the total river length and the length passing for the entire model area and 4 model areas. Similar statistics are presented below related to the 90th percentile and probability of compliance. When we click on View Performance, we see a comparison between the observed data as a ratio and the simulated output. This provides information on the performance of the model, how well the fit is with the observed data for the entire model and 4 model areas. We see statistics for the mean concentration and the percentile concentration. Model performance can also be viewed by clicking on the View XY graphs. In this case, we see scatter plots between the observed and simulated data. Clicking on View Flow Statistics allows you to see a summary of statistics on the flow, the amount of flow that comes from the headwater, the rivers, and from wastewater in the entire model and the 4 model areas, and likewise information on abstractions and lake outflows. The final button is View Water Body. In this, we can select a water body, click on the arrow, and we'll see statistics for the sector apportionment, for concentration, for load, and probability of compliance, as well as further statistics on compliance. The final element of the functionality of this tool is to calculate fair share targets. This is done by comparing the outputs with a baseline model run related to a SIMCAT model that is specified in box D3. I won't go into the details of how this is done. It's fairly complicated, but described in documentation from Upware. Just to say that these calculations are carried out by clicking firstly on this brown button and then viewing them with this blue button. In most cases, these fair share targets are calculated by the regulators, so only these organizations are likely to use this element of the functionality. This concludes this part of the video on the catchment statistics and fair share target calculation tool. I am now going to present information on the Environment Agency's Optimiser. In contrast to the other tools that you have seen in these videos, the Optimiser was developed by the Environment Agency. The purpose of the tool is to test the impact of changes to effluent permit concentrations on compliance with river standards, in particular fair share standards. It does this by extracting key bits of information from a SAGIS-SIMCAT model run, and then uses this to populate various tabs on an Excel workbook. The normal arrangement is for the Environment Agency to populate the tool for a SAGIS model region and then to provide this to water companies or other stakeholders. There are many spreadsheet tabs in which data is populated from the SAGIS-SIMCAT output, and calculations are carried out. If we look at the drop-down box in cell A1, this lists all the SAGIS-SIMCAT output locations. Also on this tab, we have information on the required load reductions to meet the WFD targets in this box before measures are applied and in this box after they are applied. If we now look down to row 16, this lists all of the wastewater treatment works upstream of this location, along with the loads coming from these works and their contribution as a percentage to the river concentrations. If we now select another site, we will see the values and the list of wastewater treatment works change. To start testing our measures, we turn to the Solutions tab. The value in cell J4 gives us the reduction in load from wastewater treatment works that is required to meet good status at this location. The box below gives the amount of reduction that has been achieved so far, which is 0 because no measures have been applied. Each row from 7 downwards lists the wastewater treatment works in the model, and the ones marked blue are the ones upstream of this location. We can filter by color in this way. Now we have just the treatment works upstream of this location. To test the impact of measures on whether we can meet this target, we go to column D, select a treatment works, we'll find there's a drop-down box, and we pick one of the options for the permitted value for effluent concentrations. We'll pick 2, for example. As you can see, now a value appears in box J5, and this is the load reduction that has been achieved, which can be compared with the target load reduction above it. In this case, it exceeds the target, so it should meet good status. We change this to perhaps 4. Now we are not meeting the target. Change it to 3, and we are just meeting the target. We could consider other treatment works, different combinations. Once we have decided on some measures, when we then go to locations downstream, these values will be retained. So then they will be taken into account when planning the measures further downstream. This essentially is the approach to use when using the Optimiser. To start at the top of the catchment, design the measures to meet the target there, gradually work your way down, applying more measures as required, until eventually you reach the bottom of the catchment. As I mentioned at the start of this part of the video, the Optimiser was developed by the Environment Agency, and they provide these tools to the water companies for use in asset planning. Detailed guidance on how to use the tool should come from the Environment Agency and through discussion with them as part of, for example, the National Investment Programme. This concludes this section on the Optimiser.
The next tool that we're going to be talking about is the SAGIS-SIMCAT Decision Support Tool, a tool designed to leverage all of the tracking information that SIMCAT produces. Now, in order to understand the tool, I think it's better if we understand the information that the tool is leveraging first. If we quickly navigate to the .dat file folder of the Saglandia model, you might remember from the first videos the D files. These output files that SIMCAT produces are quite large. There will be one for each determinant included in your project, and then they contain most of the tracking information that SIMCAT produces. I've got open the first one, which relates to the determinant ammonia. Now, this file, at first, if I don't have any filters on it, you may think that it looks like a table. But actually, if we were to filter, for example, on the percentage of annual contributions, you'll see that all of a sudden there's blanks on it. This is because this is not a table. It's a series of records that are produced by SIMCAT, and SIMCAT adds them to this file as it simulates the river quality ridge after ridge. It is not a file that is ready for human consumption, we could say. It's a series of records that need to be processed into more readable files. Now, the record in particular that we're interested in this case, if we expand this menu, you'll see that there is a lot of information being produced. And one of them is percentage of the total river load from particular discharges. So for example, this is a record that is telling you at this particular point in the map, a plotting point, or it could be a start of the ridge or a water body boundary, or wherever you got a feature, be it water quality or discharge features, SIMCAT has created an output, and amongst all of the information, it's telling you that upstream of that particular feature, the percentage of the load in the river that comes from this particular discharge is X%. So we can use this information to build a map of pollution that it's not possible with most water quality simulation tools. What we are saying here is that, for example, if I zoom in into this particular part of the map, and I'm going to select a plotting point, for example, this one here. So this plotting point, upstream of this plotting point, we've got a discharge. Now, I know what is the load, the average load, at this particular point in the map. And now I also know to what percentage of that load I should attribute to this particular discharge. So when we are trying to do water management and we want to understand what is the measure that we should apply to a particular source to reduce the concentration at a particular point to meet a specific target, we obviously have a challenge. This is complicated because this load is going to suffer decay throughout the system. What this tool does is it assumes that if we apply a, say, 20% reduction in load at this discharge, the same percentage of reduction is going to be applied to the percentage of contribution to the load at this point. Again, this is a very quick overview of the tool. I think it's important to understand the core principle of the tool, but if that doesn't make sense, bear in mind that there's a manual and there's supporting information to how to use the tool. Now, I'm going to show you what the tool looks like. It's a standalone tool written exclusively in Python. It's deployed as an executable, and it has many accompanying files that you do not need to worry about. So we double-click on the tool. It will open. In this case, this is the development version, so there's a command line that will point out any issues with the code. But as you can see, the user interface, which is everything that you will see, opened perfectly. And now I'll briefly go through the user interface. In the first tab, called SIMCAT, we would select or load a DAT file. And by loading the DAT file, the tool will find the corresponding GIS, diff files, and all of the outputs that are necessary. In the next tab, we would load the measures and targets that we want to consider for this tool. So I've got this template of measures and targets that I can show here. By measures, we mean at each particular source of pollution, be it point or diffuse. In this case, this is sewage, so point sources. For each source where we want to consider a measure, so we should be able to consider different measures for the same source, and therefore you can simply repeat the row with the same source, you'll have different measures called option names with an associated cost in pounds or whichever currency, and the expected percentage of reduction at source. This is a particular type of example that we call a silver bullet, and it's designed to be very straightforward and tell us if we remove the source, would that achieve the target? But you would have more realistic measures here. For example, if you want to reduce the effluent phosphorus concentration by bringing up sewage treatment works to TAL, you wouldn't have a 99% reduction. That might be anything from 20 to 80%, depending on the original status of the plant. The next tab is the targets. So for each point in the map that we are interested in, by no means we need to specify targets for the whole model, simply those points where we need a specific target to be met, and for each determinant, we would specify the desired concentration at that particular point in the map, and this is average concentration. Now, if we go back to the tool, once this information has been loaded, we can select different levels of confidence that won't be explained as part of this short video. We can try to assign a budget, so the options that are selected do not go beyond the budget that we have for this particular project. And then we simply indicate to the tool where the output should be. So what we are going to get is an Excel file. Initially, we'll see a metadata tab where we can see the files that we have been using to run this DST session and some summary information. We'll be reminded of the targets that we have for each assessment point. This is the most important tab. This will contain the options that have been selected in order to meet the targets. We'll see what the simulated concentration that has been achieved with those options is for each assessment point where we had a target, what the reduction is compared to the previous scenario without measures, and finally, if we are achieving compliance, if it is a new pass, a pre-existing pass, or a pre-existing fail. Since all of the measures reduce pollution, you would not have new fails. The next tool that we will be looking at is the SAGIS Model Update tool. Much like SAGIS, the SAGIS Model Update is an add-in that you can install in ArcGIS Pro, and it will give you a new tab, in this case, with a series of subtools or processes that you can run, and it will help you update a SAGIS model. First of all, what do we mean by updating the SAGIS model? So as you know, SAGIS models are updated by regulators or by specific professionals to use them in studies. And the flow and water quality data, as well as effluent discharge flow and discharge quality data, need to be updated depending on the project. So for example, for regulatory purposes, traditionally, this has been a 5-year period, a period considered long enough that it won't bias the data to one particular year if it is too dry or too wet, but at the same time not that long that would not be representative of the model conditions. In other projects, for example, if you're doing a study on a river and you only have water quality data for a couple of years for that particular river, then it might be that it makes more sense to calibrate the model on purpose to a 2-year period to make sure that everything is representative to the 2-year period where you have got high resolution data for a particular small system. Having said that, as a reminder, the water quality data will be in SIMFeatures, but this comes from a series of tables that open and update queries and uses to update SIMFeatures. So for example, SIM discharges, sample point quality, and many more. Now, traditionally, the update was manual, so you would go to different sources such as the National River Flow Archive or the WIMS dataset from, for example, in England, the Environment Agency. You would download the data and do the data cleaning, processing, calculating summary statistics, and updating of the corresponding tables on your own. Now, to do this in a systematic way, a tool was commissioned, and this is the SAGIS Model Update tool, that should help you along the process. In continuation, I'm going to briefly explain how the tool works and what you still need to do so you can make an informed decision on using the tool or not. So, the first thing is that you will have to prepare the data in a very specific format, depending on the type of data, if it is flow, water quality, and river data, or discharge data. I've got an example ready, courtesy of Wessex Water. So these two buttons here, flow and water quality under the template dictionaries tab, they let you create templates that you can then use to prepare your own data inputs. So if I open this underscore dictionary file that I've got here, this is for a water quality dataset that we are preparing. This dictionary file contains the names of the columns of the file where you are putting your actual data. And it will explain what type of data is in each column, the valid ranges for each type of data, so if it is categorical, if it is text, if it is numerical, and so on, and a series of information that will help the tool automatically clean the data. And then if we open the actual data file, you'll see it has the same name, but without the underscore dictionary suffix, and it contains all of those columns. Some of them, if you're familiar with the WIMS data sets, you may see that they are similar, but others can be different. The most time-consuming part of using the tool is putting the dataset together. The main thing to notice is that we are not passing means or standard deviations or any summary statistics. What we are passing is the actual records that we want the tool to use. Now, once that is ready, back into ArcGIS Pro, we would press New Import and point the add-in to those files. The add-in will then proceed to read those files and process the data into a new file geodatabase that will be created into your ArcGIS Pro project folder. So for example, this is the SAGIS_model update folder that has been created here, and it has, as you can see, a file geodatabase that contains, presumably, the data that we have loaded. Now, the next steps would be to use the add-ins many tools to visualize the data, filter, if necessary, the data. You can create time series plots to assess if there is any sharp change. For example, if an effluent has had a change of treatment at the plant, and that means that after 2 years the effluent quality has improved vastly, it might be that it doesn't make sense to use a 5-year period for that effluent, because that wouldn't be representative of the current conditions of the effluent, so you might want to fine-tune that. So the add-in provides a series of tools that should assist you in refining your data update. Once you are happy with the statistics that you have and the reasoning behind them, then you'll create a series of summary statistics. What this does is it creates a folder where you have a series of CSV files that are replicas of the tables in SAGIS that are going to be updated, as well as some log files used for auditing purposes. If you review these files and are happy with the contents, then you can proceed with the update of SAGIS using this button, pointing the add-in towards that folder, and then your model will be automatically updated.
So this brings us to the end of this video. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day.